Welcome, everyone. My name is Janet Huff, and I'm speaking to you from the lands of the Wabanaki Confederacy, near the Kennebec River in Bath, Maine. I'm the facilitator for this evening's program, which draws on learnings from the QUIBS Research Network. QUIBS stands for Quakers and, quote, Indian boarding schools, as they were known. The QUIBS Research Network is part of the Toward Right Relationship with Native Peoples program of Friends Peace Teams. I want to thank Brent Walsh, Beacon Hill Friends House Program and Engagement Manager, and Paula Palmer, co-director of the Toward Right Relationship with Native Peoples program, in particular tonight, for hosting and sponsoring this event. As a result of our research into the actions of our Quaker forebears, Quakers today have begun to take steps in new ways. Tonight, we will be sharing some ways that 3 Quaker yearly meetings have begun taking reparative actions for the harms of Quaker involvement in the forced assimilation of children through boarding schools that sought to erase the cultures of the original peoples of this land. While we are here now in this virtual space, we are also here in very real and precious bodies, in real and precious places, lands and waters long cared for by many peoples whose ancestors have for millennia been here in these places, people who have cared for these places and been cared for by these lands and waters. Please join me in honoring and giving thanks to these peoples, those who have passed, those still with us today, and for those yet to come. I am a descendant of European settler immigrants, newly come to Wabanaki territory. I am mindful that those of you here now in this virtual space come from many lineages and have different places in this ongoing story of colonization. I invite you to put in the chat the names of the peoples and places in whose territory you reside, the watersheds or shores or mountains or plains where you are zooming in from tonight. I acknowledge and honor the Wabanaki who are still here on these lands and waters where I live, still sovereign peoples in this place where they have lived and died, struggled and thrived for millennia. I'm still learning the depths of ways I've been shaped by and benefit from the colonial and ongoing taking of lands from peoples, of ongoing harms to peoples, and I've begun to take steps to repair harm done and to form new relationships of respect. One small way that I and Quakers in my yearly meeting have acted has been through doing research in the archival records of our yearly meeting. We cannot fully acknowledge what we do not know. Another is through educating people about the truth we find and sharing steps in a new way, such as through tonight's program, in which 3 yearly meetings will present how they have been moved to take reparative actions for historical and ongoing harm. First, a very brief introduction to Quaker organization. Quakers, known as Friends or the Religious Society of Friends, arose as a faith movement in England in the mid-1600s. They were one of the early colonial religious groups on this continent. Quakers are organized into yearly meetings, which encompass worship communities in set geographic regions and provide mutual support and accountability. We call our organizational bodies yearly meetings because each regional group has at least one meeting a year in which all members can come together to discern direction and take corporate action. Most, but not all, Quakers in the 19th century were part of one of 2 groups, Hicksite Friends and Orthodox Friends, they called themselves and each other. Both groups were instrumental in the design and implementation of the so-called Indian boarding school program initiated by President Grant in 1869. So here's the arc of our time together tonight. 3 yearly meetings will present how they have been moved to act, to take reparative actions for the harms Quakers inflicted through our forebears' involvement with the forced assimilation of children in boarding schools, which sought to erase the cultures of the original peoples of this land. We will hear first from friends in the far Northwest, from Alaska Friends Conference, then from friends in the Northeast area settlers named New England, and last from friends in the Mid-Atlantic area of Baltimore yearly meeting. Each will speak for roughly 20 minutes. Along the way, we encourage you to use the chat to make comments and raise questions. We will end with some words of encouragement to send us forth, offered by Gail Melix, also known as Greenwater. Gail is an enrolled member of the Herring Pond Wampanoag and Sandwich Monthly Meeting of New England Yearly Meeting. And we'll have also at the end a few announcements of additional opportunities for learning and actions you can take. While our focus today will be on reparative actions, we acknowledge we'll be touching on deep wounds and ongoing harm. Please take care of yourself. Let us be mindful to speak both tenderly and boldly to others and to ourselves. A few of us will remain on Zoom at the end if you have questions or concerns to raise. Now, we'll begin with Alaska Friends Conference. Several friends from Alaska Friends Conference are with us tonight. Art Kenninger, Jan Bronson, Kathy Walling, and there may be others. Together, they have prepared a short video narrated by Jan, which we will show you now.
Alaska Friends Conference is one of the Quaker groups that is grappling with the Religious Society of Friends' role in establishing and running Indigenous boarding schools. This presentation shows some of the steps we are taking for learning and repair in coordination with other Friends groups and especially with Alaska Native people and organizations. The 3 places that play the most prominence in this story are Douglas in southeast Alaska, near Juneau, Quake, which is a little more than 100 miles south of Douglas, and Kotzebue in the northwest part of the state, above the Arctic Circle, above the nose of Alaska. Alaska Friends Conference has been involved in advocacy, accompaniment, and relationships with the Alaska Native people for decades. But our most recent chapter starts here in 2019, when Diane Randall, who is in white in this photograph of our yearly meeting, came up to Alaska and asked to have a meeting with Alaska Native leaders to learn some of the issues they were facing. Several Alaskan Friends, Diane Randall, who was then General Secretary of Friends Committee on National Legislation, and leaders, staff, and interns from First Alaskans Institute met together in their conference room. First Alaskans Institute is a well-respected policy, advocacy, and community development organization of Alaska Native people. One of the First Alaskans Institute's leaders was Ayu Kasatak. I was in the meeting and clearly remember Ayu telling us that it was critical for Friends to learn our true history of missionizing in Alaska. She encouraged us to be brave as we did our research and to help pull back the veil about what we learned. In other words, to take on the task of talking about forced assimilation as a source of trauma rather than leaving it for Alaska Native people to be the only ones talking about this. Ayu talked about the harms of boarding schools. She invited us Friends to consider apologizing down the road and to help repair what had been broken, if asked, following the guidance of Alaska Native people. A few days after this meeting, Friends met in annual sessions. There was really a sense of excitement and resolve to follow Ayu's guidance. We formed a committee which has met monthly since then. At first, we mostly read and discussed historical documents and books written by and about Friends missionaries in Alaska, and we checked in with IU and others at First Alaskans Institute as we went along. About a year afterwards, we invited IU to come to participate in our next annual sessions, and she asked us, as you do this research, what Alaska Native people are you accountable to? We scratched our heads, but soon thereafter, the Institute invited us into an accountability partner relationship. A big part of our role as accountability partners was participating in a series of tribunals about a number of topics, and to put our hands alongside theirs for healing and for the transformation of institutions that still do harm. During the tribunals, individuals told of their own and their communities' experiences. It's hard to express how meaningful these tribunals were. We heard of exhaustion, grief, and rage, but also stories of strength, courage, humor, fierce love, and resilience. We learned about assaults, including the inability to access ancestral land, the depletion of food, unjust laws, racism, pandemics, and the generational nature of trauma. But strikingly, a thing that was named over and over as particularly crushing were the boarding schools. The children may have come back strangers who didn't necessarily know how to parent their own children, and the boarding schools were intentionally designed that way by the federal government to destroy Native American culture and assimilate children into white society, as you heard earlier today, and as those of you in this meeting probably already know. The tribunals took place over about a year and a half on Zoom. They were hard emotionally, but we got to know people. People started giving us their phone numbers and vice versa. We kept our ear out for what might be useful. We built relationships, and we tried to say yes when we were asked, "Can you do this thing?" I'll give you a couple of examples of some of the things we did as we were participating in the tribunals. One was we helped with the funding and construction of a memorial bench for murdered and missing in Alaska, with acknowledgment of the particular impact on the Native community. In order for the family members of 3 murdered and missing Alaska Native relatives to give testimony of their loved ones at the dedication of this bench, we assisted with their travel and lodging. Another example is that Alaska Friends Conference provided travel and housing support to a group of Alaska Native healers so they could provide traditional healing during an Elders and Youth conference. Meanwhile, Alaska Friends Conference also drafted an apology for the harms done by Friends Indigenous boarding schools. We shared the draft for input from our Alaska Native partners. These include Aurora Sampson, who was then superintendent of Alaska Yearly Meeting, an evangelical yearly meeting of primarily Inupiat people in northwest Arctic Alaska, and Ukpik Jim LaBelle, Inupiat elder, boarding school survivor, and then president of the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. We had come to know Jim through the tribunals. During Alaska's annual sessions in 2022, Jim told us what it was like to attend boarding school in Wrangell, Alaska, starting at age 8, and the healing he had done since then. The power of Jim's presentation was important in Alaska Friends' approval of the apology, a big deal for us in August 2022. This is one of the Friends missions and schools which boarded kids and assimilated kids that we learned about. This is a Friends mission school and mission home in Douglas, Sayik, Alaska. Here are the children in the school. This picture was taken in 1887. This is the new Friends meeting, including the adults. We want to thank Jim LaBelle for connecting us with the Tlingit organizer of Juno Douglas's Orange Shirt Day event. Jamie-Ann Sethtin Hasselquist asked us if we could share our apology during Orange Shirt Day, taking place a few days later. The event was taking place in Sayik, Douglas, at or near the site of the Douglas Friends Mission School. The event was designed to help heal from the collective trauma of boarding schools. 2 of us friends offered the apology to about 150 people most of whom were Tlingit. Orange Shirt Day is also known as the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. It started in Canada and it takes place every year on September 30th. The day honors the children who did not survive Indigenous boarding schools and their families and their communities. Here we are offering our apology, Alaska Friends Conference's apology, on Orange Shirt Day. It has been very humbling for us to be part of a process in which those of us whose institutions have done great harm are meeting with those whose communities have been harmed. We recognize the obligation and the healing potential of that. We are strongly aware that approving and offering an apology is a beginning, and now we get to live into the commitments we made for the rest of our lives. One of the commitments was to tell other Quakers about assimilationist practices that happened in the boarding schools. And as part of that, we were invited down to Sierra Cascades, yearly meeting of Friends in Oregon, to present at their annual sessions. And we Alaskan Friends in turn asked whether Alaska Native people could actually be the ones that presented during the keynote. And they said yes, and here we are, a big contingent of Alaskans at annual sessions. Here are Jim LaBelle, Jamie-Ann Seftin Hasselquist, and Susan LaBelle about to give their plenary addresses during Sierra Cascades annual sessions. Here the presenters are sharing what boarding schools were like for themselves or their families. Jim said that one of the most moving things for him was when descendants of the missionaries who had come from Oregon to Alaska came up to him at this gathering in Sierra Cascades and apologized personally. You'll also notice Alicia McBride from Friends Committee on National Legislation is here having lunch, and Jim and Susan and Alicia were able to talk and plan for lobbying while they were here as well. While we were in Oregon, we took advantage of the week we had there together to do some other things. Here we are at George Fox University Archives, looking at artifacts that had come from Alaska by way of the missionaries. This was a little baby's raincoat on the right. While we were there were steps and missteps. It was a growing process for us friends, and it really helped us understand how important relationships are for the work. Here are some of the asks that we shared with other friends while in Oregon. One is to help pass federal legislation establishing a Truth and Healing Commission on Indian boarding schools. It passed the Senate this past session. It came close in the House but didn't pass, so it needs to be reintroduced and passed. Another thing, Jamie Ann introduced us to Joel Jackson, tribal president of the Tlingit village of Quake. The Quake tribe is hoping to establish a regional cultural healing center in an unused Forest Service dorm building, so we started raising money for that as well. A week after our trip to Oregon, another member of Alaska Friends Conference and I flew to Kotzebue, Alaska, in the northwest part of Alaska, above the Arctic Circle, to attend the annual sessions of the largest yearly meeting in our state, Alaska Yearly Meeting. My yearly meeting, Alaska Friends Conference, is dwarfed by them in numbers. It is a long trip from Anchorage to the shores of the Chukchi Sea. Quaker missionaries went to the Kotzebue area in 1897 and established missions there and in neighboring villages. Almost all members of Alaska Yearly Meeting are Inupiat, and Alaska Yearly Meeting is an evangelical yearly meeting. From left to right, you see the new red church on the left, the green pastor's housing, the white church that was the original church and that still serves as a fellowship hall, and the wooden building is a school. It might have housed the Kotzebue Friends School that ran as a boarding school from 1958 to 1965. Arthur O. Roberts, who's a Quaker historian, says that this school was established by local people to keep their kids closer to home so that they did not have to be sent away to boarding schools farther afield in other parts of Alaska or the other parts of the lower 48. This is a congregation of Inupiat Friends in Shumnak in the upper right in 1940, and then the lower left is Friends High School in 1962. We of Alaska Friends Conference kept in touch with the Superintendent of Alaska yearly meeting as we were drafting or sharing the apology for their input and guidance. During their annual sessions in 2023, the Alaska Yearly Meeting Superintendent invited Sarah and me to share our apology. Afterwards, the congregation prayed forgiveness, to use their term, everyone praying out loud all at once. During meals and conversations afterwards, people sitting near us shared experiences that they had had in boarding schools, both negative and positive. Some individuals spoke with gratitude about the gifts of the Spirit through Jesus Christ that missionaries had brought to their region. From the pulpit earlier, people spoke about the value and healing of apologies when harm has been done. These were some of the church leaders in 2023. One thing that helped build relationships is that we worked in the kitchen a lot of the time, and that is where a lot of the best conversations took place. Meanwhile, members of Alaska Friends Conference were continuing to raise money for the Regional Cultural Healing Center in Quake. After about 6 months, Tribal President Joel Jackson invited members of Alaska Friends Conference to share our boarding school apology, as well as the money we had raised during a community gathering in Quake in January. And here we are looking at the map and getting on the plane. Here is the community of Quake, and you can see the tide is going out. It is a beautiful place. That little stream is full of salmon in August. The first Friends went to Quake in 1891 when a missionary in nearby Douglas moved to Quake to teach in the new government school. Oregon Yearly Meeting formally started a mission in Quake in 1893 and built this church, which was sold to the Presbyterian 19 years later when Friends left the area in 1912. And here is the church when it was still a Friends church, sometime before 1912. Jamie Ann, here on the far right, was a really important connector for us with Joel Jackson. Here we are during Cake Day, a really, really moving day all around. Here we are reading the apology on the left. On the right, the woman who's wearing glasses, standing to the right of Joel Jackson, accepted our apology. Then there was an open mic time, and there was a man that came up. He was seated in a wheelchair, and he said, I have heard that there are apologies being given, but this is the first time that I have heard one. Your words landed on my ears, and I feel a weight being lifted. In addition to the apology, we offered a check for $92,000 plus for the Healing Center. $75,000 of that came from Sierra Cascades, and some of you on this call may have contributed as well. The Healing Center will help people heal from intergenerational trauma caused in part by Friends' insistence on assimilation and how they enforced it when Friends were missionaries in Quake from 1891 to 1912. The Healing Center will be based on connections to culture, land, and one another, the very bonds that assimilationists tried to break. As Jamie Ann Hasselquist has said, the things they took from us are the very things that will heal us. We really saw an example of that kind of healing that took place as people danced following the apology. These are the Kikwan dancers, and it was so wonderful, powerful, moving, community building to watch them dance and then to dance with them as the whole room did, from some of the oldest to some of the youngest. The next thing we did was really lean into trying to pass the truth and healing legislation. This is a group of Alaskans who traveled to Washington, D.C. to lobby for that Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding School Policies legislation, organized by Friends Committee on National Legislation. And then more community building, both in Kotzebue, where I returned in 2024, and with friends as we tried to share what we were learning and doing. When we were in Quake in January, we were invited to come back in August to participate in Dog Salmon Festival. And I really want to emphasize the importance of building relationships and trying to say yes when you can and when you're invited. That has really been important for us on this journey. So here we are back in Quake in August. Sierra Cascades member Julie Downs, with the black sweater, is the great-granddaughter of Quaker missionary Belle Gardner, who came to Quake in 1904 when she was 19 years old. Julie's family has had treasured items from Belle's time in Alaska that they have passed down and cared for 120 years. But on this trip, Julie brought these items back to return them to the people of Quake. The items will be owned and cared for by the Quake tribe. People said it was like their relatives coming home. While we were there, we visited the Forest Service dorm building that will be the Regional Cultural Healing Center. The Forest Service leased this to the Quake tribe for 10 years free of charge, and there will be a blessing ceremony there next spring. Here we are looking down on the common area on the left side and into one of the dorm rooms on the right side. It sleeps 16 people. It's off the grid, but there is a well, a generator, a nearby boat launch, and a big machine shop covered, part of the building area for doing projects. I've talked about some of these lessons already. The third one has to do with a metaphor that we were given. It is that we friends are in the back seat of the car. We're not driving. We're not in the front passenger seat. We're in the back seat. We're on the journey. There's a role for us to play. But Alaska Native people know what is best for Alaska Native people. Regarding number 5, we have heard from Alaska Native leaders about the importance of Quakers learning about and stopping white supremacy behavior that many people with European ancestry have unwittingly picked up because of the society we live in. These behaviors include things like automatically taking charge, filling silence with talking, disregarding elders and children, expressing urgency rather than letting things unfold in the right time, acting as if Western norms and ways of doing things are superior to other ways, and talking about good intentions as a way of explaining bad behavior. This is good work. It is hard work, but your heart and your world will expand as you do it. We are at like baby step 2 at this point, and eager to find out and follow what comes next. This sign was planted.
Thank you. We'll now
over and
move
over
on.
that we are all in this together, that we friends have a role to play and that we are welcomed to play it. Transformation, healing, truth, accountability, repair. There is work to be done, and let us do it together. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the last drops of wisdom. So now we'll move on to Gordon Bugby and Mary's Werner. Mary and Gordon are longtime members of Beacon Hill Monthly Meeting in Boston and active in NEYM. Mary's long interest in the lives and issues of Indigenous people led her to join the Indian Health Service, where she served on the Standing Rock Lakota Reservation from 1980 to 1982. Gordon dates his interest to reading an account of the Cherokee Trail of Tears assigned by his high school history teacher. Over the last several decades, they have been involved in various peace and justice activities, including volunteering with the North American Indian Center of Boston. Their trip to what is now called Oklahoma is the result of a leading to begin the work of relationship repair and communication called for by New England Yearly Meeting last August. And they'll have a slideshow to accompany their talk.
Thank you, Janet. And thank you, friends, for the opportunity to speak with you this evening. I must say what I'd like to do right now is just spend some time in silence, reflecting on what Alaskan friends have talked about, have learned, have demonstrated. And I think I will just take a moment to do that. That it was so very powerful. It gives me great hope that there is a way to do this work. And I'll just be quiet for a moment. Mayor, I've been asked to talk about a trip that we made just last month to what is now called Oklahoma. Before I get into that, I want to say a brief word about language. Indigenous people have been clear for some time that their preference is that we refer to them by their tribe or nation. To talk about the Cherokee or the Quapaw or the Citizen Potawatomi. But there are times when we need words to describe the whole community or a large part of that community. And words like Indigenous and Native and Indian are used. Unfortunately, there is no consensus among Indigenous people as to which word they prefer. And so you'll find us using all three interchangeably. We recognize that these are land badly in some people's ears, and we regret that, and we mean no offense. We found that none of these words is without offense, and so we will go ahead knowing that we will learn as we go and try to do better the next time. Our trip was rooted in a process that began in New England Yearly Meeting many years ago. It has always been rooted in local conversations between individual friends and individual Indigenous elders, between meetings and small groups of tribal people. These culminated in the approval in 2014 with a minute repudiating the doctrine of discovery, which most of you will remember is the collection of various papal declarations and royal proclamations that form the basis, the legal authority for the colonization and the settlement of the Northern and Southern Americas, and unfortunately the enslavement and genocide of millions of Indigenous people. Unfortunately, this is still part of American law and was used as recently as 2005 in the Supreme Court. After further study and living with that, what we had learned about the doctrine of discovery, the New England Yearly Meeting approved a letter of apology to Native Americans in the Northeast, those states that are now known as Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. With having passed that, we continued to learn and listen, and we were confronted with information that Paula Palmer had brought to the Friends' attention about the role that Quakers had played in the Indian boarding schools, as they were called. And New England Yearly Meeting assigned a group to to do that research. And several of the people who were in part of that, Andrew and Janet and Betsy and perhaps others who are on this in this meeting tonight, were part of that group. And in 2024, that group submitted a report documenting the extensive involvement of New England Friends and in the Indigenous boarding schools and in the policymaking apparatus that existed in Washington. That group made several recommendations that are similar to the ones that you just heard from Alaska Friends about supporting the Truth and Healing Commission and the supporting local efforts to assert, remind people, acknowledge local Indigenous sovereignty. The third one recommendation they made, I'll summarize briefly, is to explore opening communications towards offering a collective apology and asking what first steps might be taken, might be acceptable to those people in the tribes and nations who were most directly affected by New England Yearly Meetings activities. We'll talk in a minute about what those tribes were. The other thing that was in our minds was words from Anishinaabe writer Patty Krowick in her book, Becoming Kin. She talks about becoming kin often begins with the difficult conversations, being willing to listen to the things that marginalized people have to say. Means forming relationships that connect our communities. Solidarity is not symbolic. It is not a gesture or a way to end a letter. Solidarity is actions we take to put us on the side of oppressed, not the oppressor, that put us in relationship with the original people of this land, rather than those who impose other systems on them. And so it was with those things in mind that Mary and I felt led to respond to the call to establish communications and explore the relationship possibilities of rebuilding relationships with the people that had been affected by the boarding schools run by New England. Oklahoma, as you may know, is big, not as big as Alaska. It's apparently a tenth the size of Alaska, but it is roughly the size of New England. So it is comparable to the terrain that we're used to. The two areas in Oklahoma that we were most focused on were in the Northeast, in what is now Ottawa County, who was then the approximate same borders for the Quapaw Agency, which became the home for the Quapaw, Ottawa, Peoria, Miami, Modoc, Eastern Shawnee, Wyandot, and Seneca Cayuga nations. We were also interested and turned our attention to what was then the Sac and Fox Agency, which is now the Lincoln and Pottawatomie counties, just south and east of Oklahoma City. And that was for, since the 1870s, home of the Iowa Sac and Fox, Kickapoo, Absentee Shawnee, and Citizen Pottawatomie. Our general plan was to travel through Dallas-Fort Worth and drive to Oklahoma City. And then from there, spend some time in Edmond, just north of Oklahoma City here, to take a couple of day trips to visit the homeland of the Iowa and Sac and Fox people. And then we drove north to Miami in the northeast corner of the state. We're there for 3 days, and then drove south and west to Shawnee, again, just south and east of Oklahoma City, and spent another 3 days there. A few facts about the trip. We were gone for 12 days. We drove, once we got to Oklahoma City, we drove 1,140 miles, more or less. We attempted to visit 22 sites. Some of them we had very specific information about. Others we had things like 5 miles northwest of the cemetery in Winnett, Oklahoma. We got to many places. We stood overlooking empty fields in some other cases. We attended
Gordon?
meeting twice. Yes.
Excuse me, Gordon. We are not seeing slides, and I'm not sure if you meant to be showing them now or shortly.
I'm sorry. Yes, no, they're supposed to be seeing these, and that's my fault. I did not do proper screen share. I
That's okay.
apologize. Folks, I
Try
got carried
again.
away.
This is a learning curve we are all on
I
together.
got
Right.
carried away.
We'll recover.
All right, here we go.
We see them now.
Now you see slides. All right, we're going to go very quickly to the beginning. But we won't go all the way back. So Oklahoma, as I said, is a big place, and we went to the northeast corner in this area, which is the homeland of the Quapaw, Ottawa, Peoria, Miami, Modoc, Eastern Shawnee, Wyandot, and Seneca Cayuga. Thank you, Janet, for stopping us and getting us back on track here. And then to the Sac and Fox Agency, south and east of Oklahoma City, the home of the Iowa Sac and Fox, Kickapoo, Absentee Shawnee, and Citizen Potawatomi. As I said, we went first to Oklahoma City, did a couple of day trips, went to the northeast to Miami, and spent 3 days there visiting school sites and cemeteries and cultural centers. And then we went to Shawnee again back in the vicinity of Oklahoma City, where we repeated the same thing for a different set of tribes. Fun facts. I think this is where we left off. 12 days, 1,100 miles, 22 sites. We attended meeting with Hominy Friends Meeting and the Kickapoo Friends Center. We attempted to visit 9 school sites. We were on the spot a number of times and nearby other times. We went to 5 cemeteries, 5 cultural centers. There's an enormous Superfund site that takes up a good part of the Quapaw homeland. And we drove through there to see the awful devastation. It's a story not unlike what the Osage endured when oil was found on their land, exploitation and tremendous destruction that was left in its wake. We also saw a buffalo herd that is being kept by the Modoc Nation in an attempt to build a sustained herd there. And we endured a windstorm in Oklahoma. Used to the hurricanes here on the East Coast. A windstorm on the plains is quite something. Glad to have done it. No need to do it again. In terms of Quaker process, we attempted to do things in right order. And so we did this all in consultation with the Right Relations Resource Group for New England Yearly Meeting and with the Quaker Indian Boarding School Research Group that was appointed to do the research. We have a Care and Accountability Committee that includes Susanna Schell and Sarah Gant of Beacon Hill Meeting. I think Sarah is here this evening, and Janet Huff, whom you have met. We have a travel minute endorsed by our monthly meeting and our quarter. We received grants from our monthly meeting and from 2 yearly meeting funds, the Legacy Gifts Fund and the Obadiah Brown Benevolent Fund. And we're hoping to receive some support from the Lyman Fund. In order to be respectful of the various tribes that we were visiting, we sent letters to tribal representatives, 14 different individuals. 2 of them replied. One we were able to follow up on and one we were not. We did end up visiting with the Modoc folks. Hopefully we'll see the Seneca Cayuga folks when we go back again. After we returned, we got a phone call one evening from an Iowa tribal elder who had only just received the letter that we sent. And hopefully this is another person that we'll be able to connect with when we go back. There's a lot that can be said about many of the places that we visit. We'll just talk about 3 visits that I think had particular impact. I must say, as we talk about them, I'm humbled by the work that has gone on in Alaska, and hope that in a year or 2 or 5, we can give a report that's not unlike the one you heard from them this evening. Mary's going to tell you a little bit about our visit to Stroud and the Sac and Fox Cultural Center.
Thank you. Like Gordon said, I was impressed by what Alaskan Friends had to share, and hopefully our beginning relationships will grow as yours did in Alaska. On our second full day there, we went to Stroud and stopped at the Sac and Fox Cultural Center. And we had an unexpected and delightful conversation there with Houston Stevens, who is a longtime civil servant. And so he was employed there as sort of the welcome person at the center, at the museum. He was actually Kickapoo and not Sac and Fox, but he knows their languages are somewhat similar, and he seemed to have good knowledge of both nations. Our interaction started out a little bit rough. I think that Houston was surprised that that we wanted to stay and talk if we could. He said that most people just stop and use the facilities and go right on out. And we did use the facilities, but we said that we were interested in seeing what was in the museum and in talking. Gordon said that we were interested in Indian boarding schools, and Houston was quick to say that that's not something that we like to talk about with white people. So that was a little bit of a rough start, but we all recovered. Houston invited us to sit down, and we proceeded to have a 90-minute conversation, which felt very relaxed after a little bit of a rough beginning. He did say about the boarding schools, and he said this, we weren't going to mention anything for a little while yet, but he said that about the boarding schools, the harm has been done and cannot be undone. And then he shared that his grandmother had gone not to one of our Quaker schools, but his grandmother and two great aunts had attended Carlisle. And his grandmother had returned, but his great aunts had not. He went on to talk more about his family, about Sac and Fox and Kickapoo culture. He was happy to answer questions that we had. We said we really wanted to just hear more about whatever he wanted to share. It felt like it was the beginning of a relationship in a new way. We showed up. We were there to listen and learn, and it turned out to be a quite lovely interaction, and really boosted us since it was our first conversation with an Indigenous person.
This is the boarding school that Friends operated in the 1870s. This is its location now. The school is gone, but the tribe's water tower exists just to the right out of the frame here. A couple of days later, we went to the town of Wyandotte, which is in Ottawa County in the north east corner of the state. And they have a timeline on the wall that sort of circles the central room of in the center. And we encountered this plaque that Mary's going to read to you.
As in Ohio, the Indian boarding school in Oklahoma was first organized as a mission school, not by the Methodists, but the Society of Friends, Quakers, in 1869, with classes first held in 1872. The school was administered by the Society of Friends until 1880, when the United States government took control and changed the school's focus to an industrial school for the benefit of the Indian children. The Indian School Quapaw Agency consisted of 160 acres on the Wyandotte Reservation until it was closed on June 15th, 1980. The place you now stand was once reserved for the indoctrination of little Indian children. The school strived to teach the Indian children how to be good white children amid an increasingly white community. Hazel Wallace, niece of Bertrand Nicholas Oliver Walker, and faith keeper of the Seneca Cayuga tribe, stated in a 1975 interview, quote, "The teachers tried to make white children out of us. We were taught and ordered to forget the old customs and were punished if we spoke our own language," unquote. Today, our traditional language is not only being spoken, but taught for all to hear and speak. Our history and traditional crafts are also being taught as in the old days. Not long ago, many children cried at night as they longed for their homes and parents. Today, our children are laughing, singing, and dancing with parents in tow at their sides on top of a hill that holds many emotions.
The folks who were staffing the cultural center were extremely welcoming. And one of them checked in with us a number of times as we moved around, looking at the cultural objects and the displays that they had. And she quite insistently said, please, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I, having trying to learn from my mistakes the previous day, I very tentatively said, well, I do have a question, but I don't want to be offensive. I don't want to go where I shouldn't go. And it's about the boarding schools. And she said, go ahead. And so I asked her a bit about whether or not they were looking for records of the students who had attended these schools. And she said that they were. And I said, well, I happen to have some lists that I got when I was at the Federal Archive in Oklahoma City in last February. Would you be interested in them? Oh, yes. So we went into her office and I was able to share those records with her. And it turned a nice visit into a very intense conversation about how we can work together. And again, an encouraging note that that there is a place for us to be in support, to listen, to follow the lead. But we were reminded that one of their central questions, the central question for many Indigenous people is, where are the children who never came home? And then the cultural heritage, tribal heritage director, Sherry Clemens for the tribe said, it is never too late to begin repair, which sounded to us like the other part of the tension that went with Houston Stevens' statement that the harm has been done and can't be undone. That both things are true, that you can't undo what has been done, but there is repair is possible, and it's never too late to start. The very next day, we went to visit with the Modoc Nation and their cultural preservation officer, who had been one of the people who had responded to our letter. She'd also been somebody that I had corresponded with last year when I was in Oklahoma doing research. This is the meeting house that was built by Friends and has been used as recently as the 1980s. This is a sample of one of those school attendance lists. I have blanked out the names of the students. But you can see that there are several tribes represented in nations, the Modoc and the Shawnee and several others, and also some white children attended this school. This record is from about 1892, I think. Our conversation with the Modoc folks went on for a number of hours. And we ended up touring the cemetery with them, and they shared stories from that. And it's our hope that we can begin to develop kinds of shared work with the Modoc and with the Wyandotte folks in particular. It remains to be seen what form that takes, and we will certainly be led by them. But our hope is that we have begun that process that we outlined of establishing communications and beginning to look for ways to apologize and to make some substantive contribution to the healing that's so important, so needed. The other two places that we felt were important to stop were two of the Friends churches that are in what is known as Indian country. Friends came to Oklahoma kind of in two waves. One was in the 1870s and 80s as part of the missionary efforts. And then later in the 1960s and 70s, when folks from the East Coast and West Coast ended up teaching in places like Norman and Stillwater, Oklahoma, and brought with them the FGC variety of Quakerism. And so you have both traditions out there representing kind of two different layers. And it felt important to us to attend particularly to the friends who had been there for a long time and who had deep roots in the local Native communities. In Hominy is largely Osage congregation. It was formed in 1904 at the request of the Osage elders and has been supported by the Orthodox Friends group. The meeting at McLeod, known as the Kickapoo Friends Center, was established in part with funds from New England Yearly Meeting by Elizabeth Hest, a missionary and teacher from New York. And this group later became associated with the Evangelical Friends International. It was a reminder that friends come in many varieties, and how Quakerism manifests itself is not consistent necessarily from one place to another. It was good to worship with these folks. It was good to see another kind of relationship between friends and Native people, and we were well received in both places. Lastly, there are a couple of things that we continue to reflect on. One is the significance of Quakers' role in the boarding schools and in the larger program in designing and advocating for the whole assimilation program. Once we complete our work on the boarding schools, when and if that happens, there is still work to be done on our role as advocates and architects for the larger system. Personally, I experienced a moment when I wished people had been more excited about our being there and having been brought it. And that was just a reminder to me that however important this was for me, this is part of their everyday life to deal with these issues and to move forward. And I need to work, but I need to do it without expecting to be acknowledged or patted on the head or enthusiastically welcomed back. This is just part of the work to be done. Another thing that we found ourselves thinking about is that reparations are necessary and important, but they need to be grounded in relationship. Patty Crowick is clear that we are all related, and we need to start acting like good relatives. And so I think that if we think about reparations as simply a transaction in which a harm has been done and we do something to alleviate the harm and we're done. And I think that if that's the way we approach reparations, we're not only not really doing the work, but we're really missing a huge opportunity to kind of reweave the fabric of the human community. And then finally, we find ourselves reflecting on how is it that friends came out to the plains and pursued the assimilationist program. The content of it's not so hard to understand, but the fact that friends sort of gave up on their 250 or so year history of opposing any kind of coercion, that the program was so deeply coercive. Families were threatened with loss of rations if their kids didn't go to school, and on and on and on. And so it's deeply troubling, I think, to a lot of us. And we were reminded of it when we were out there, that there's this part of the process that we really need to understand better, for our own sakes, as well as for understanding the history. We hope to go back, maybe to powwow, although I think neither of us are looking forward to Oklahoma in July, and when we're told to expect 108-degree heat in the daytime. Maybe we'll find another time to go back, or maybe we'll just have to bear it. We're on a road. We don't know where that road takes us. We are excited and eager to see what lies ahead, and open to whatever form that takes. Thank you for your attention, and I hand it back to Janet.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary and Gordon. We'll move now to Baltimore yearly meeting, where we have Pat Powers and Dan Cole who will be presenting, with a few words at the end from Rachel Overstreet of the Choctaw Nation, who's the legislative representative for Native American advocacy for the Friends Committee on National Legislation, FCNL. Patricia Powers is the former clerk and the historian of the Baltimore Yearly Meeting Indigenous Affairs Committee. For 5 years, she directed the Native American Advocacy Program for FCNL. In 2022, she published an ebook about the more recent history of the committee. The earlier history of the committee by Martha Claire Catlin is entitled As They Were Led, Quakerly Steps and Missteps Toward Native Justice, 1795 to 1940. Pat has updated her book, which in print version will be entitled Respect and Justice for Indigenous Peoples, Becoming Allies. Dan Cole is a former co-clerk of the Baltimore Yearly Meeting Indigenous Affairs Committee. He recently retired from the Smithsonian as its cartographer and geographic information systems coordinator after 39 years, including mapping Native American land tenure and various topics on Indian-white historical relations. I'll pass it to you, Pat and Dan. And yes, Andrew, if you would please spotlight the speakers.
Dan, I think you're starting and we can't see you. Dan? Well, let me go ahead.
Thank you.
So I wanted to make 4 points, and one is how we decided where the reparation should go. Second, how we interacted with the Pawnee Nation. Third, how Indigenous people are being affected by the Trump administration. And 4, what Friends could be doing now. So we had already the research done, as was mentioned, by Martha Catlin. And we knew there were 16 agencies that had been assigned by grant to Quakers. And BUAM was part of the Hicksite group. And there were 6 agencies in that Northern Superintendency. It was rather overwhelming when Paula and other people would talk about doing reparations, because clearly that was far more than we could take on, or most people could take on. And then we understood from Martha's research that the real agency that Baltimore Yearly Meeting dealt with was the Pawnee Agency. So even though somebody from BYM was head of the whole section, Benjamin Hollowell, we were able to say this is where our attention will be. And I think that's important, that a number of groups doing reparations are struggling to figure out sort of the perfect place. And I found by our being able to be decisive and say exactly what we wanted to do, that we got $20,000. And I think it could have gone on for years if we hadn't been that specific. So Dan, do you want to jump in now, or?
Yeah, I was going to share the map of the Pawnee that we made use of for looking at the interaction between the BYM and the tribe is initially, which was in Genoa, up in Nebraska, and there was both a day school and a boarding school there. It's not clear that BYM was involved with the boarding school, but it doesn't make any difference whether it was a boarding school or a day school. We acknowledged that we contributed toward helping to diminish their culture by, and like every other boarding school or day school for that matter, by requiring the students all to, speak in English, and they weren't allowed to use their own language. Anyway, you can see from the map that they had considerable territory that was ceded to the government in 1833 and 1857. And then they were shipped down to the Pawnee Reservation in 1876 in Indian Territory. Now, three of our members went to the Pawnee Reservation as part of the reparations that we got the BYM hierarchy to agree to, and that's $10,000 this past year and $10,000 this coming year for the tribe to use as they see fit, and the tribe decided to use it for their language program, and they were I believe relatively well received, and I think Pat can speak more to that than I can actually. Go ahead.
So, in terms of our relationship today, Martha, when she wrote her book, had talked with the Pawnee tribal historian. And then once this sort of consensus seemed to start around with many Quakers that the language restoration might be the only thing we could do, and that made sense. I researched whether or not the Pawnee already had a program, because it isn't up to us to initiate something. And it turned out that yes, they did. It started in 2016, and they worked a lot with Indiana University, which happened to have an expert in the Pawnee language. Sue Marcus was able to find the right person to speak with at the reservation, and that was the head of the Culture Resources Division, and head of that is Herb Adson. Now, it's important to realize, compared to, I think, Alaska and some of the other yearly meetings, we had no pre-existing relationship. And it isn't just that we didn't have it. The Pawnee, I think, had given little, if any, thought to Quakers. We had been so steeped in this, but they were very here and now. They were happy. There were multiple phone calls. They were happy to hear of our interest, and of course, if possible, money for their program. But I think we could have just sent a check, and that would have been fine. But Sue formed a relationship with Herb, and eventually he invited us to come down for 2 events, for a Veterans Welcoming Back Day on Veterans Day, and then for us to attend a language and culture class. And we would do the presentation of the apology we'd written and the check at the smaller class. We never had any contact with the leaders, either the Business Council, which is their main organizational structure and leadership, or with the Chiefs Council. There are 4 bands of Pawnee. And we think this is important in some ways in terms of the culture and language people weren't eager to try to have us hook up, with the people that really ran the tribe. They were happy for us to deal just with the language. We this was important, I thought. We debated whether or not to go in person. I personally thought that we shouldn't. I thought that some ways it's a burden to that maybe we should send the money and be quiet about it and not make ourselves so front and center. With the calls back and forth, I was worrying that they were going to have to entertain us. 3 of us went. I was really wrong. Sue Marcus was right. The thing that meant the most to them was that we had come in person. They kept saying, our friends from the East are here. Our friends from the East are here. So we were able to have some nice relationships in that moment. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. People like from Alaska are building long-term relationships, deep relationships. This wasn't like that. And I want to share that because, you know, for the people who are thinking about this, everybody doesn't have to do it the same way. And you really need to tune in to what that tribe or organization wants. What signals, you know, are they giving you? So when we were there over those 3 days, there were actually very few solemn moments. There were no ceremonies that had to do with us. The ceremonies were all for the veterans. Each of the veterans was introduced in person. There were dances that had to do with every war that was fought. So World War II, and nobody's still living, but their descendants could come and do a dance for Iraq, whatever. So that was interesting, and we were watching. And then the master of ceremonies called us up, and we had to walk across. It was a roundhouse. We walked across, you know, a huge space, and we had Sue say something, and he said, we'd like to hear a few words of why the Quakers have come. Don't talk very long, he said. And so Sue said things, and then he said maybe a sentence or two about how this was important and some really horrible things had gone on. But mostly he started teasing us. A lot of it was camaraderie and see how we were reacting to that and sending us back to our seats with joking and teasing, which was not necessarily what we expected, what was nice, and it's not necessarily what anybody else would get in this group. We went to the language class, and it was wonderful. 1 hour for language, 1 hour for culture. And not only was Herb there, but a younger guy who'd done his master's in Pawnee language was there, named Taylor Moore. And again, even though we were there, they didn't go back at all to talk about how they lost their language. They were seeing it as, you know, reactivating. And they were proud about what they were doing now. They were really pleased that they were bringing it back. The focus was not on how they lost it. And Taylor had been hired as a consultant for a short series, maybe some of you have seen it, called The English. And so often in the past, you know, tribes were misrepresented accidentally or nobody cared. And their dress, their attire, their language, their customs, nothing was right. And so in the English, Taylor and several other Pawnee, you know, were able to give them the information, you know, that they needed. And he was so excited about that. And for the next culture class, he was going to show the first 2 programs, the first 2 episodes. And so we were there, and we gave the apology, and we gave the checks. And Herb said some very meaningful words about our wanting to atone and how important that was. But they were very excited about what they were doing for themselves. And I think we really need to think about that. They were taking photographs when we gave the check. Everybody was sitting around the table with their cameras, and they were very eager to tell us about exactly how the money was being used. Some of us had sent checks earlier how that money was used. Dan, unless you want to say something, I'll go on to how I think things have been affected since the election. Did you want to jump in and say anything?
Since the election, well, the Trump administration uh, doesn't have the best of relations with most tribes, but it hasn't so far. They it hasn't been as bad as many people were expecting. So that's the good news.
So I will tell you some of the things that have gone on. I went to the National Conference of American Indians, and they were very upset because in the process of immigrants being taken away suddenly, Native people were sometimes being held or harassed, or they wondered if they were going to have to start carrying their tribal IDs. The head of NCI was just furious about that. Here are the first Americans that are maybe going to be dragged off, and we know that's happened with one person. They were upset that the program funding had been frozen. There's a difference between the DEI programs and programs that come from treaties. So that's very confusing to a lot of people, and they've spent a lot of time trying to explain that to agencies and get agencies to make the exception. They were concerned that 41 offices might be closed, but worse, all the layoffs and the firing of people, because their agencies in health service and all are very understaffed to begin with. They're worried about sacred sites that are in jeopardy. And there's not as much as that, but a lot of disrespect, just like, saying that we're not going to have Harriet Tubman, featured anymore. Ira Hayes and the Iwo Jima statue. He was a hero in World War II. Everything about him was taken down. Everything about the Navajo code talkers were taken down. They were so mad, and they got the information put back up. For those who want to learn more, there's a coalition that's been built that you can go to the National Congress of American Indians online and keep up to date on all of this information. Native News Online also gives a lot of information.
And check the Native American Rights Fund for a lot of legal action that's going on.
In terms of what else we could be doing, we focus so much on the past, but women and children need funding right now. Education is being hit, and that affects Native people right now. There's a real problem with missing and murdered Indigenous women, and that's a law enforcement issue. And there are other things in Indian country that we need to be tuned into, that they are very concerned about boarding schools, but they have other things going on. When Leonard Peltier was let out of prison after 49 years, if you don't know about him, you can look it up, Leonard Peltier. There was crying and celebration throughout Indian country. And I was called by an Indigenous woman and invited to a celebration. Now it was 3 days notice, and that's something we found over and over. We were invited very last minute. It's helpful if we can change plans and go, because that's what builds the relationship for the next time. Okay, thank you. Turn it over to Rachel.
Thank you, Pat and Dan, and Rachel, welcome.
Han Mitakiapi, Chante Washtena, Pe Tuzapi, Rachel Overstreet, and Machiapi. Hello, my relatives. I greet you with a heartfelt handshake. My name is Rachel Overstreet. I'm Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, but I was raised on the lands of the Oceti-Sakowin, the Seven Council Fires in South Dakota, and I currently live on the Nacotchtank, Pamunkey, and Piscataway lands in Washington, D.C. I work at FCNL as our LUDGE rep for Native American advocacy, and I wanted to just talk a little bit about the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding School Policies Act and what your meeting or you yourself can do to help support the federal work to repair the relationship between the government, church groups, and Native peoples. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat. This is a link to our main page for Native American advocacy at FCNL. There are really three things that I'm hoping to offer up to you as things that you can do to continue the work for a federal Truth and Healing Commission. The first is to consider having your meeting write a statement of support or a letter of support or a minute, however you would like to phrase it, in support of the Truth and Healing Commission. We gather these and then bring them to federal offices to show that Quakers support the work of a Truth and Healing Commission. The second thing that you can do is to write Congress yourself. There's a link on our webpage that takes you to a site that you can build a letter to write Congress. Right now, the Truth and Healing Commission bill was introduced in the Senate. It's S761. It was passed out of the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs last month, and we're hoping that it'll move to the floor soon. It has not been reintroduced in the House. And so what we want is to make sure that before it's reintroduced, there's a swell of support from Quakers all across the country talking to their House members about why it's so important that this bill is reintroduced and passed quickly. As many of you know, the elders who attended these schools, so-called schools, I'll say, are old now, and there's only so much time that we have for these people to share their stories. So it's our priority to get this passed as quickly as possible. The last thing that I'll say, I want to thank Pat for giving an amazing summary of what has happened since the Trump administration took office in January. But FCNL, we do a monthly update on happenings in both the administration and the Hill that concern Native people. You can also sign up for that update, the Native American Legislative Update, on that same webpage. And then I'll also just say, if there's anything you need from me, feel free to reach out. You can reach out through the contact us portion on our website. Those emails make their way to me. We want to do everything we can to support meetings who want to speak out on this issue. And again, thank you so much for your time. So excited to hear of all of the work that meetings across the US are doing. It's really great because we work so much on the federal level and don't get to see a lot of that great kind of grassroots action. So that's all from me. But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for being with us tonight. And I saw that someone was interested. If you could drop a few of those links in the chat for your website, that would be great. We said that this program would run till 9 o'clock. So I'm going to, rather than having time for Q&A now, hand it over to Gail Greenwater to offer some words to send us forth. And then some of us of the presenters are willing to stay on a little extra after 9 o'clock if people have questions that they want to answer that we'll try to answer. But I'll like to have a chance to hear from Gail first. You've got the microphone thing, Gail.
Yes, I want to express my gratitude for all that's going on here. I think there's a lot of really important things that are happening, and I had a sort of a script, but I'm not going to follow it. I'm actually going to talk a little bit about what's coming from my heart, and I guess mostly it's a thank you for what's going on here. Katapatanamu, for all the good work that people are doing around research and reports and presentations. And I think that many of us have spoken about relationships, and I think it's so important going forward for reparations that there is relationship building. And I've heard several people talk about that. Our life is about relationship. It's the one we have with ourselves, with other human beings, with our natural world, and with our Creator. And I believe that right relationship which is what we need, is more than possible. And it may be one of the most important factors for survival of life on Earth as we know it. Because the truth and the reality is there is no separation between us and all other life forms. And if we think there is, we've really kind of lost our way. And so some of these things that I think that are important to talk about is, all of creation being sacred and interconnected, that we are dependent upon one another for life. And for me, I believe that's one way that God shows his love for us, shows us what right relationship can be in its purest form. And that's all life working together. When I think of my two faith communities, Indigenous and Quaker, I see the deep similarities that far outweigh our differences. Indigenous core values and Quaker testimonies share common ground. And in this shared soil, I see a bountiful harvest ahead for us, ripe with promise and blessed by Creator. For there is joy in doing this work. There is joy in doing this work. And there's the despair that cries out for it. Janet had asked for a couple queries that we might share with the faith communities they could take back with them if they want. And here is one of the queries. Can we warmly invite all who feel led to a seat in the circle as we worship and discern our way forward for reparations? What is ours to do? And this query, how do we grieve and heal our way forward in the boundless promise of divine love? I wanted to talk a little bit about Indigenous spirituality. I'll be as quick as I can. It's land-based. The beauty of God's creation is the visible truth of God's existence. The web of life on earth includes all living beings who are our kin. And when you realize you belong to a family of life on earth, this is the beginning of right relationship with nature. My father would say, you take care of the land and the land will take care of you. And this worked for 12,000 years prior to colonization. Land is a living, breathing, spiritual entity central to traditional beliefs, practices, and ceremony. Everything is sacred, and nature teaches us and heals us. Harmony Way is a teaching for humanity that has been passed down for generations of Indigenous people as part of the original instructions given for creating and maintaining peace on earth. And this includes the peace within us first, and then with all of creation. Peace and harmony are partnered and create balance with a suffering that is part of our human condition. Because without peace, there is no justice. And without justice, there is no peace. The systems of oppression, injustice, corporate greed, and annihilation must stop. History shows that empire will collapse. It cannot be sustained. Awakening to God's love and truth can take us beyond the experience of historical trauma and cultural differences. No, it cannot erase cultural genocide or other atrocities that Indigenous suffered at the hands of our forebears. It cannot do this, but our faith and practice of it can transform us. And the work can be done with great tenderness. And I have a closing prayer here. I'm sorry I couldn't do the rest of what I've written, but I'd like to finish with this closing prayer. Our closing prayer is drawn from the New Testament in Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 8. Here in the First Nations version, an Indigenous translation of the New Testament. Verses 22 to 23. It is plain to see that all creation is groaning in pain like a mother giving birth. And even we, who have first tasted of his spirit, are groaning on the inside as we wait for Creator to finish the purpose for which he has brought us into his family. Creator has set us free by his spirit. It is the hope of all creation, and all creation will share in the freedom of this life of beauty and harmony given to all of Creator's children. Verses 35 to 39. What could come between us and the power of this kind of love? Could times of sorrow and suffering do it? Could not having enough food to eat or clothes to wear? Could dangers from weapons and warfare do it? No. No. One thing we know for sure: nothing can separate us from Creator's love, not death or life, not spirit messengers or dark spirit rulers. Nothing from the spirit world above or from the earth below. Nothing today or in the days to come. Not one thing in all creation can separate us from his great love, a love that is ours in the chosen one. Creator sets free our honored chief. Aho and amen.
Thank you, everyone. So, friends, it's good to have been with you together this evening. May we hold these words in our hearts. I typed up something like the queries that Gail offered. I did not catch every word, which I will put in the chat. There's much to ponder. And Paula has a few more opportunities for us. So if you would share what you wanted to share, Paula, in the chat, and then we'll release everyone who wants to go when it's time for you to go, and see if there are a few last questions we can answer.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you to all of our presenters tonight, and thank you all for being here with us. Just want to bring your attention to a couple webinars that are coming up, hosted by the Toward Right Relationship with Native Peoples program of Friends Peace Teams. The first one is next week already. It's, and I've put this in the chat. April 16th, we have a webinar called Building Relationships with Native Peoples, Examples from Colorado Communities. We will be speaking from the communities of Boulder and Longmont and Broomfield, and we will be sharing lessons learned from our work here. And then on May 31st, we have an online version of our workshop, Roots of Injustice, Seeds of Change Toward Right Relationship with Native Peoples. And the registration pages are linked there in the chat. We welcome you to both of those programs and all of the programs that will be coming up later on this year. And I also just want to mention, Janet, perhaps you were going to say this also, that we will be sending out a follow-up email to you that will probably come from Beacon Hill Friends House. And it will include a link to the recording of this program tonight. And it will also include resources that have been put together by members of the QUIBS Research Network. So be looking for that sometime probably late next week. Thank you.
Again, thank you, Paula. Thank you, everyone. I did see there was one question in the chat that might be one that Gordon and Mary could speak to briefly of what are local Oklahoma friends doing, Quakers in Oklahoma.
I actually don't know that we can answer that. We made some inquiries before we left for Oklahoma, trying to connect with people, and we weren't able to come up with much. So I'm sorry, whoever asked that question. I don't have a good answer for you. I'm not I'm not aware of things at this point.
I thought that someone, Dick Nagel, who is the pastor, wasn't he
David Nagel?
doing language
Oh.
work?
Yeah, David's been doing language work
David.
for a couple of decades. Again, I'm stumbling on the two different friends communities in Oklahoma. Yeah, the community that has been there for generations is quite engaged with the indigenous community, both the Kickapoo and the Osage especially. But I was actually thinking about the more recent arrivals in the university towns and places like that, and I don't have information on that. What little I had a few contacts to follow up on, and I didn't come up with anything particularly useful. So I'm sorry, that's not a very good answer, but that's the best I got for you.
Betsy, I see your hand. Did you have some other questions from the chat?
Yeah, the one other question, general question that was raised, which I think goes beyond this particular presentation, has to do with people wanting to know about the forcible relocation of tribes and how come they all ended up in Oklahoma. Because people have grown up in parts of the United States like Ohio that are full of indigenous names of places. But where are the people? Well, the people are in Oklahoma. And how did all of that happen? So rather than, Gordon does these beautiful maps of how people ended up in Oklahoma, but rather than going there, one of the resources, well, two books that I would recommend. One is Ned Blackhawk's, I'm blanking out on the name of it, The Rediscovery of America, I think it is. And the other is Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, Indigenous History of America. Forgotten it. I should have pulled those out. But yes, there were forcible removals, most particularly after the 1830 Federal Removal Act, from east of the Mississippi to west of the Mississippi. And then as white settlers wanted that land, from Nebraska, Kansas, South Dakota, North Dakota, south. And then the Modoc, who Gordon talked about, were relocated from Oregon in boxcars in November by the US government.